Samurai! She who ruled our front!
Ghost of Tsushima was developed by Sucker Punch Productions. Development of the game started in 2014 after the studio completed infamous Second Son. During the conceptualizing phase, the studio decided to create an open-world game with a heavy emphasis on melee combat. Before deciding on the setting as feudal Japan, Sucker Punch considered various other settings and themes such as pirates, Scottish outlaw Rob Roy MacGregor, and the Three Musketeers. The team later found a historical account of the Mongol invasion of Tsushima in 1274, and the entire vision clicked into place. The Mongol invasion of Tsushima was chosen as the setting because the conflict was easy for people to immediately conceptualize. To ensure that the game's world was authentic, the team consulted Japan Studio, a fellow Sony game development team. Early in the game's development, 10 members of Sucker Punch flew to Japan and Tsushima Island for a guided tour with a historian. Japan Studio also helped connect Sucker Punch with historians who the team consulted on the history of the invasion and local Japanese customs and traditions. Experts on Japanese dialects, religions during the 13th century, and the recreation of 13th century kanji were also consulted. The team invited Ide Rusetsu and Kiwami Masakumo Sike, experts from a samurai martial arts school, to perform motion capture for the game and advise the team on sword fighting.
You don't eat cheese? All right. So it's a hamburger samurai, where it's an American studio trying to create a love letter to this genre that grew up watching movies and reading in comic books and trying to add to the genre as an homage.
So what about this Kamakura period that you chose specifically in the history of Japan?
Well, I knew that the fantasy of being in feudal Japan was very strong, and definitely who doesn't want to be a samurai? So when looking in history, I noticed that the Mongols had invaded Japan, and I can't think of a better enemy in a video game than foreign invaders trying to destroy and take over your culture. So when reading about the island of Tsushima and how it was invaded, it seemed like a good starting point for this fictional story that we're making up to kind of ground it in some kind of reality.
While the team initially considered introducing real-life historical figures into the game, they refrained from doing so after being told by experts that it would be insensitive. Jin's samurai armor and katana are not historically accurate, with his armor based on that of the Sengoku period during the 16th and 17th centuries. According to Chris Zimmerman, one of Sucker Punch's co-founders, samurai armor from the 13th century did not align with players' expectations of what samurai armor would look like. Nate Fox explains where Sucker Punch drew its inspiration from for Ghost of Tsushima. The center of it was the Seven Samurai. That was the foundational concept for so many people about what a samurai story is. Probably Usagi Yojimbo, for me, is 40% of the mix. And then it's a combination of the Seven Samurai and Yojimbo, with a bit of good old lone wolf and cub. The team believed that the story would be relatable, as they considered Jin's journey of relinquishing who he was to become something new, a universal message that would resonate with modern-day players. Despite this, the player can still switch between the ghost style and samurai style seamlessly, as Jin's roots as a samurai do not change despite his transformation to become the ghost. Jin's last name was a tribute to Stan Sakai, the creator of Usagi Yojimbo. A number of video games also inspired the development team. Many of the game's items were inspired by Tenchu, while the option to play as both the ghost and an honorable samurai was influenced by Onimusha warlords. Karateka and Red Dead Redemption were also cited as sources of inspiration.
We did some research into different Mongol groups. Mongols, for instance, are legendary for keeping falcons. And different groups of Mongols would treat them as family members and carry around feathers from old hunting partners that had died. So one of the groups that you fight in our game of Mongols, They're the group that come from this falconry background. We have another group that pays attention to the Mongol god Adquan, that is about fire. We did that so that as you move across Tsushima, you feel like there are a lot of different types of Mongols that you're meeting, that it's not just one kind of warrior. Because the game is very vast, and the Mongol Empire is incredibly vast.
The team decided early on that wind blowing around literally everything in the world would be Ghost of Tsushima's visual calling card. This was inspired by early Chanbara samurai films, which often feature movement in the background in the form of dust, smoke, and wind. The team initially added icons and a compass to the game to aid the player's navigation, but they realized they spent an excessive amount of time looking at them and ignored the in-game world itself. The team then decided to use wind to guide players to their objectives, forcing the player to observe the world. The art and environment teams had a hard time switching to Ghost of Tsushima after working for 9 years on the infamous games, which features a punk rock visual style. Shadow of the Colossus and The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild both inspired the game's minimalistic landscape and aesthetic, though the team strived to have more photorealistic visuals to highlight the game's picturesque setting. Much of the game was designed to be serene and tranquil, so that it more sharply contrasted with moments of violence throughout the game's combat and story. Fox stated that the 3 pillars of the game's combat were mud, blood, and steel. The team wanted the game to be grounded, visceral, and challenging. Fox added that they strove to keep sword fights deadly, so that each combat encounter would be reminiscent of those seen in samurai movies. The combat system was reportedly the most difficult feature to implement in Ghost of Tsushima, as the team had to build multiple versions of it and modified its design frequently during the game's development. Early playtesters complained that the enemies were sword sponges, breaking immersion. The team responded to this criticism by adding hit points and armor points, but ultimately decided that all enemies would be defeated within a certain number of hits. Health of enemies would not change regardless of the selected difficulty. Instead, enemies would adopt more defensive tactics, such as parrying and blocking at higher difficulties. Early prototypes of this design was described as overkill, as enemies would deflect all attacks. As a result, the stagger system, which allowed players to break their enemies' defenses while remaining offensive, was introduced.
Tried as best as we could to make stories about people struggling to survive inside of a horrible wartime situation, and that includes people siding with the enemy, or sometimes the enemy doing kindnesses for your people.
That makes these people look really human.
Which is absolutely a goal as you explore around Tsushima and get to know these people that are your countrymen and explore their stories. The hope is that people will get lost in just getting to know people and the culture that is so alluring.
The game received generally favorable reviews according to Metacritic. It received a combined 40 out of 40 score from 4 editors of the Japanese video game magazine Famitsu, only the third Western-developed game to do so. The game also received praise from Toshihiro Nagoshi, the director of the Yakuza series, who applauded Jin as the game's main character, adding that Japanese studios were unlikely to greenlight a game starring a middle-aged man due to marketing reasons. Fox and Connell were named as tourism ambassadors to Tsushima Island in March 2021 for spreading the name and history of Tsushima through their works.